good to have you back on. Just a caveat on that, or just to add to that as well. I mean, obviously we've had COVID since our last proper conversation, and I have to tell you, it's been a real sad time to listen to so many stories, mental health struggles, and many tragedies as well since the COVID. So people have been struggling, particularly mentally. And so this podcast and this episode, I'm really sort of excited to share some, your story, just to inspire people really about, the struggles that you go through. And what we were just talking about before the podcast, what I call like the tipping point, where I'm sure many, many people listening to this have been at that tipping point where they've had a really rough time. And you know this better than anyone. And, the training, the exercise regime just gone completely out the window. And what happens when the training goes out the window is the food goes out the window as well.
Yeah.
And, they just think, oh, I can't do this anymore. And, just as a starting point, you got to that point.
We did that that happened in the summer, didn't it?
Happened in the summer. And I was saying to you just before we started, having been a coach for 20 years, I get a sort of fit. I just know when people are at that tipping point. It's just almost, and I just had to reach out and bite it in the bud, because I knew what would happen is I might not see you again, or I might not see you for a few years. But if I do, the chances are in a few years' time, things are going to be a bit more of an uphill struggle for you. So let's just backtrack before we get to that part. Let's just backtrack a little bit. You've had a real traumatic, few years. I mean, do you mind just?
No, I
think
it's easy to talk about it now. Then it's still quite hard. It's still quite raw. It still feels like it happened yesterday. But sadly, in 2018, we lost our son during childbirth. He sadly passed away. It's all a bit surreal. The flashbacks to that day, they're still quite raw, and they're still quite in there. And then subsequently after that, mental health challenges have been absolutely massive. It's been, that side of things, it's a bit tough. Still, I'd say, people always say time's a great healer. And I think, somebody had actually told me that at that year, I probably would have found that quite hard to hear that. But actually, it's one of the things that it doesn't ever go. You sort of just learn to live with it, learn to sort of cope with it a little bit better. And you sort of also develop those tools to sort of deal with those mental health issues that have come out of that. And, I've sort of learned along this way, certainly through LPT over the last couple of years, that, the biggest